Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Econ Playground. It's been a while. We are going to do a special little thing for the next few weeks. Logan, Caleb, and I are going to be reading John Chrysosthom's sermons or homilies on the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. But they're collected under a work that was published by St. Vladimir Seminary called John Chrysosthom on Wealth and Poverty. And Logan just kind of recommended this to us. And then we thought, hey, why not, meet up and make some videos out of it, out of the discussions to make it a little bit more formal, a little bit more interesting. So I'm sure you guys can find a copy around somewhere if you want to read along or something like that. But yeah, Caleb is back. Everybody knows Caleb. He's been on plenty of videos before. But Logan is here as well for the first time. So just what's up, Logan? Hey, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
Of course, anytime. And so we're just going to start quick by reading in full the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that Chrysostom is doing lectures on. We're going to do about there's about 6 collected here. So we're going to do 2 each week for 3 weeks, and then we'll have a little triplet. And so I'm gonna read. This is Luke 16:19 to 31. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to them, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Okay, so we read the first 2 lectures on this, and so what are your guys' initial reactions? Either just the parable itself or the things that Chrysostom said about it. What are the most interesting themes?
I mean, they call him the golden mouth for a reason. He has a great way of exegeting scripture. But I think, for our purposes, we have a couple quotes. Marcus, I think one that you'd like to point out was some of the courtroom metaphors and imagery that he evokes here. And then there's some interesting discussion at the end of the second lecture about just like private property, being stewards of the poor. And so I think that might be interested to get into some of the foundations for that.
Yeah, it's cool because this parable, obviously, like the main unique thing that people pull out of it is it's a story about, a rich man and a poor man, the difference between the way that they live their life and how the rich man can kind of bask in his own glory just from the fact that he's rich on earth. But there's also a majority of it is discussing the afterlife and the different conditions of the afterlife and what it would even mean to be in some place like the afterlife and the implications that has for today. And so a lot of people end up citing this particular passage as a scriptural reference for what the afterlife might be like, because, in contrast to the way that popular culture proposes it, it's not very clear. It's not like there's 4 verses that says, this is what heaven is, this is what hell is, and this is how it works. It's not that easy. And so a lot of people refer to like Abraham's side, or sometimes I have a footnote here that says Greek bosom. So a lot of times people refer to Abraham's bosom. Is that the same thing as heaven? Not exactly. Why don't we call heaven Abraham's bosom today? It's a little bit different. And there's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, I think he does a lot of interesting stuff about the relationship to wealth and poverty and how it affects our spiritual conditions here. What kind of obligations we have with wealth if we're granted that, and our relationship to the poor. And I also think that, like Logan said, he's called Golden Mouth for a reason, and he does a really good job of tying in other references to Scripture and showing how something connects to other things. And he does a good job, I think, in the first one of connecting, um, finding fault in the rich man because he would not help Lazarus, even though he was constantly at his doorstep. And even the wicked and angry judge relented after the woman constantly petitioned the judge. And so, just relating this parable to other parables throughout Scripture, I think he does a really good job of tying everything together.
Yeah, yeah, and he is commenting definitely on what it's like to be in like what your present conditions of wealth have to do with the way that you live, but he's not coming strictly down on the poor are more righteous. That's a really rudimentary that some people might interpret, like the Beatitudes, like blessed be the poor, as if cursed be the rich is like the other side of that that's kind of implicit. Like, so, and I mean, monks and ascetic practices and fasting, those are obviously like very relevant things, but it's not a really simple, easy thing like some kind of like spiritual class warfare. The poor are actually like the winners in the long run, because he does say like the poor should recognize that they have gifts as well. It's about their inner life, and the rich should recognize that they have an inner life that they're trying to cultivate as well. And I think that's a big part of it. Like the most awesome section to me that I was referencing other people to was this kind of like a analogy or a little parable that Chrysosthom builds, that I'll just read just because it's so good, because the golden mouth really is apparent here. He says, even before the punishment to come, those who practice wickedness and live in sin are punished in this life. Do not simply tell me of the man who enjoys an expensive table, who wears silken robes, who takes with him flocks of slaves as he struts in the marketplace. Unfold for me his conscience, and you will see inside a great tumult of sins, continual fear, storm, confusion, his mind approaching the imperial throne of his conscience, as if in a courtroom, sitting like a juror, presenting arguments as if in a public trial, suspending his mind and torturing it for his sins, and crying aloud, with no witness but God, who alone knows how to watch these inner dramas, which is really cool. And he's saying that this is your wealth has no effect on how this inner drama is going to play out. You'll find the virtuous among the poor in potentially a same distribution as the virtuous among the rich, right?
But it's almost like he describes wealth and poverty. I think in that second sermon, the definition he gives is almost as if it's a disposition of the heart rather than some kind of material being. And so, I mean, the poor man, obviously, in his material wealth, we wouldn't consider him by any means wealthy, but the sort of the internal security and assurance he has of the things to come is what's, actually making him wealthy there. And this internal struggle and sort of the fear and, the conscious stricken rich man who knows that, his greed could eventually lead to eternal damnation is the one that is actually in dire poverty here.
And in that section, he talks about how the disposition of the heart of someone who's truly wealthy is someone who requires little and seeks little after worldly things, and is content pursuing virtue. And the person who is truly poor is someone who's always demanding more things of this world, and equates it to if someone was always thirsty, but they were by a river that was never running out of water, you wouldn't call them healthy because they had a lot of water to quench their thirst. So even if you have lots of riches to quench your envy, the fact that you have, envy and carnal desires that you're not learning to tame doesn't mean that you're well off. And I think he also does a good job of describing the different struggles and advantages of being rich and of being poor. So the poor can become prone to cursing God and becoming disheartened and becoming bitter and envious. But the rich can become kind of distant from the poor, lacking in altruism and mercy and love and caring. And so someone who's rich has the opportunity to show more altruism and love and mercy and compassion on someone than someone who has little, and someone who has little has more and greater opportunities to practice asceticism and requiring little worldly things. And so he's rejecting the notion that someone has a lot in this life because they're more virtuous, or has less in this life because they're less virtuous.
Yeah, it's almost like an invert. Well, in some ways, it might be an inverse of the caricature that Weber builds of Calvinism. Not even necessarily that that's what Calvins today, or back Calvinists either today, or not just any guy named Calvin, the Calvins of today. That was a caricature of both Calvinists today and back then, in that it would be the opposite, that the better you're doing, the more God is blessing you, which is not necessarily true. And a thought that I just have is, you could think of it like, let's say there's a natural distribution of wealth, just like from inheritance or something like that, right? 50% of people are rich, 50% of people are poor. And then we should expect it to be, in just the basic sense, based on what they inherited, how much virtue would you expect from either class? I think it would be roughly equal. But let's say that if you build a model where more vicious people are more likely to climb the ladder because they're willing to backstab other people or take advantage of other people, then you'd find more of the vicious in the poor class moving to the rich class. And if the rich people are more if the virtuous among the rich are giving away their wealth or spending it on things that aren't good investments, that don't increase their wealth, then the virtuous among the rich move towards the poor. So if you do have a model where being a good person means you lose money and being an evil person means you gain money, then I can see someone end up like implicitly expecting somebody who's rich to be more vicious, or expecting someone who's virtuous to be poor, instead of expecting someone who's poor to be more virtuous. So almost in a weird way, depending on your model of, or your understanding of the economy and how someone would change classes, it might affect the way that you take these kind of heuristics about someone's virtue or vice. So there's no way for someone to be rich unless they're backstabbing someone or doing something sneaky. If you really believe that, then you might expect a rich person, even if they look good or they seem to be doing virtuous things, you might expect them that way. And in a weird way, that's almost what McCloskey specifically is pointing out, is what changed in the enrichment was the belief about whether or not you could be virtuous while increasing your income very fast. Which is, and then when she said her idea is something like, when that shifted, which might have something to do with Protestantism, might not, we're not really sure. When that shifted, that belief about how people make money and whether or not it's virtuous, and Dr. Klein calls that like the pursuit of honest income. Like Adam Smith encourages the pursuit of honest income, not any income, honest income. If pursuing honest income can really actually make you hyper rich, but you maintain your virtue somehow, or your conscience is still, at peace, then that would change the way that people approach their economic life with respect to their life of virtue. But it's actually quite messy. And like Chrysosthom says, like, only God knows how to watch the inner dramas of the conscience in the first place. So yeah, I don't know what you guys think about that. I didn't expect to talk about McCloskey, but
yeah, I guess something he kind of takes as given, it seems, is the distribution of wealth that currently exists in the people he's talking to. So we'll see. I mean, this is, the first 2 of 6 or 7. And And so I guess we'll see if he actually talks about the actual pursuit and business itself and things like that. But so far it seems that he's just he's concerned with the whether like the amount that wealth people have, and then the faith that they have, whether or not they're actually putting their trust in that wealth itself, or whether they're freely giving that out.
Yeah, it's unclear if he thinks of income as like pretty fixed, and based on the economy that you're in, like the level of mobility in the economy that you're in is would change the way that he gives a sermon like this, I think, too. And I don't know much about the Constantinople economy at the time, but I imagine there is a more of an aristocratic class and more of a peasant beggar kind of class. And he talked about slaves too in here. So an economy with slaves in it is a totally different animal than the economy that we're in today. So, or I mean, very explicit chattel slavery, obviously. I don't know if you would call this, the Roman slavery was actually kind of different than the kind of slavery that we imagine in the American South, but it's still slavery nonetheless. Yeah, and so even understanding sermons like this, when he might say things that seem strange to us or seem like he's presuming things about wealthy people to us, but you'll have to understand the context that he's in too, right? So yeah. Yeah, other thoughts about that? Yeah, he doesn't seem to have like, we'll move forward into the other lectures, and from what I understood from the introduction, he doesn't seem to have like, he has like strong thoughts about how Christians should live and what Christians should do. He starts out the first sermon with like, yeah, I think it was just Saturnalia or something. He's like that. Yeah, all those other people were dancing, drinking at the Saturnalia feast. I was dancing, drinking too, of the Lord, in the church. I was praying. That's what I mean by dancing, drinking. So he clearly has things that he like wants Christians to do and like encourages them to change their ways, but it doesn't seem like he has like a grand political program. He's not like he's not a Christian socialist or something like that, even though he's often associated with something like that. Or people invoke the idea that he did not like private property.
Yeah, and it's all like you said. It's not a political agenda necessarily. I mean, he's very theological in this. I mean, he says in this intro, he's talking about dancing in the chorus of Paul. He's referring there to Ephesians 5:18, where Paul says, "Don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit." So Paul's juxtapositioning these two things as well. And it seems like throughout this, he's and this is kind of what Luke does as well. Luke kind of has the gospel writers themselves between. If you look at the Sermon on the Mount, where Matthew in Matthew writes something like, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the poor in spirit." And then you turn to Luke, which is much more materialistic, and Luke says, "Blessed are those who hunger, and blessed are the poor." And so you have two different ways of looking at this, and it seems like he's doing kind of the same thing almost in the Gospel of Luke, where you are kind of making these differences between sort of the spiritual and the materialistic. And so he's setting these up very well in both of these sermons, and and dividing them out. But I think it's like I said, a lot of this is him, really getting into the theology of this. So some of the political implications of this that people might try to draw from it aren't always there that they're looking.
Yeah, I think in the introduction, the translator mentioned that he saw private property as something that it works with a Christian understanding or with an understanding of the Bible, but it's not mandated, and that he had a longing for more communal living that was talked about in Acts, but did not think it as something that was necessarily mandated or should have been pushed. But he didn't really address that in either of these sermons, so maybe we'll see that more fleshed out in the other ones. But something I did notice that was kind of an issue of doctrine that he brought up in the first sermon was addressing issues of the Sabbath and how the Sabbath is a day of rest from worldly affairs, but shouldn't be seen as a day of necessarily leisure or idleness, as I think the term that he uses, to set a day of idleness, and that it should be a day of spiritual work and of a day of setting down, working with the things of the world, but you should still be um, dedicated to praying and reading scripture on those days and doing spiritual work. And so not seeing it as a day of like revelry, or idleness or something to give into the passions on this one day, and then you go back to living a proper Christian life on the other days. So I thought it was a really good description of what we're called to do on a Sabbath. And it's also a good juxtaposition to what they were saying on the pagan feast the day before, where everyone's getting drunk and giving into the passions. So I think it's a very good way to set a clear dividing line between the Christian community in Constantinople and the pagan community.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff like that. And I wanted to shift to this other passage where this is a little bit more where he's talking about the afterlife stuff in the parable. And this is something that I had never heard before, but it must have been a controversy going on at their time. So this is on page 41. He says, the poor man died, Christ says, and was carried away by the angels. At this point, I wish to remove an evil disease from your souls. Many of the simpler people think that the souls of those who die by a violent death become demons. This is impossible, quite impossible. It is not the souls of those who die violently which become demons, but the souls of those who live in sin. Their nature as human beings is not changed, but their way of life imitates the wickedness of demons, which is really interesting. So, and then he says, Christ indeed made this clear in reference to the Jews when he said, you are the children of the devil. He called them children of the devil, not because they had changed into the devil's nature, but because they did the devil's works. Very cool. Yeah, I'd never heard of anything like that, or anyone describing something like that, people becoming demons.
Yeah, I guess that must have been, I hadn't either. It must have been a controversy at the time. He mentions, I think it's like another paragraph down, that he thinks that the reason that this was introduced is to kind of take away from the glory of the martyrs. And so I guess in the empire, I mean, if you make up these stories, these contrived stories about what happens to martyrs and stuff, you'd obviously affect the way that people see them. Not only that, or that people would be willing to die for the faith. So but yeah, and I mean, interesting controversy that I wasn't aware of either.
Yeah, I think there are people who do think that not necessarily that you take up the nature of a demon, but that you become people who are go to hell in the afterlife are demonized. In I don't know exactly how to describe that, but become like the demons after death. But the idea that that would happen due to the nature of your death, yeah, clearly has no kind of scriptural bearing. And also, you have plenty of examples of the apostles, like all or mostly dying pretty violent deaths. And so, if they were becoming demonized as dying, but it does become a very good way to try to discourage martyrdom. So it does sound like Chrysosthom's rationale behind the possible source of that coming up makes sense.
I mean, it's similar to a lot of like popular culture conceptions of heaven when, that just like if you look, I remember like in, I would read like the Saturday morning like cartoons, comic strips, and there was one, it was like Far Side or something like that, where there's just guys in heaven and they're just angels, like people that went to heaven, they're angels. And then as a kid, I was like, oh, I guess that's what happens. Like I'm learning the theology from like Saturday morning cartoons. And then I asked my dad, and he's like, yes, some people believe that, but not everybody. And then that like shifted my whole perspective. I'm like, oh, this is a controversy. Like, do people become angels when they die? And I guess it is a little bit, but a lot of those afterlife questions, it always ends up like really depending on the wording. Like, what would it mean and obviously Chrysosthom like goes further into that. Like he says, oh, when Christ says you are children of the devil, he doesn't mean this. He means you become extensions of the demons, or you become the tools that the demons use, which for all intents and purposes is the same thing as being their children somehow. So it's proper for Christ to say you are the children of the devil. And he says the phrase that started the whole thing was the poor man was carried away by the angels. What does that mean, to be carried away by the angels? You know, a lot of these like afterlife kind of words are shifty, weird, but fun to think about. Yeah.
He does kind of go on about that a little bit after, where he talks about how clearly your soul doesn't sit around here on earth and it has to go somewhere. So you need angels to be a guide because your soul's never gone to heaven. And so it was something that I hadn't thought about, and my theological understandings of the afterlife are still pretty incomplete, and so it's interesting to log this one away and see how it fits into a more full picture. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting quote, interesting to think about.
Yeah, like you said, Marcus, I mean, one of the things that it seems like a similar controversy that we might experience in our day is people thinking that when you die, you like become an angel, or you'll hear people all the time saying, like, oh, like this person has died, they've gained their wings, they become an angel. But I mean, this is really like, it doesn't make sense. First of all, I mean, Chrysostom kind of refutes this quite easily, just in the opposite way in controversy with regard to demons. But I mean, he's saying that the nature itself isn't changing. And so if humans and angels are both, and demons as well, in a different sense, because they're fallen angels, but are both the creation of God, then it wouldn't make sense for our nature to change into some other type of creation in the afterlife. And so he even says that when we're talking about being the children of the devil, he's saying that scripture often speaks of the laws of relationship, not meaning the relationship of nature, but that of virtue and wickedness. So with regard to even, the angels or the demons, the relationship itself isn't your nature being the same. It's just whether or not you share in their virtue or their wickedness. So it is sort of erroneous today to claim that when people die, they become angels, because that's just your body and soul are eventually reunited in the new creation, but you're not an angel.
Yeah, the other when people talk about ghosts, like somebody that did something wicked on earth is somehow still connected to what they did on earth when they die, and they haunt the location that they were in for a period of time. I don't know how related that is to this, why someone would think something like that their fate has something to do with their wickedness on earth or not, or their relationship to earth. So if you are a tool of the devil, the craft that came out of that tool is related to you even after you die somehow. So the devil's child like remains on earth even after you die. I'm not sure how to think about it. When Christ refers to them as the Jews as children of the devil, or the Pharisees. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? There's a good passage right at the beginning of the second sermon where he says, even if we do not seek virtue, but at least praise it, we shall perhaps be able to attain it. And even if we do not avoid evil, but at least censure it, we shall perhaps be able to escape it. So he's drawing a very close link between your own approval and what you do. So like the little phrase that people pull out of it is like, you are what you worship, or you slowly become what you worship. You hear people say things like that, or what you admire. It's almost, those are almost identical things, admiration and the attempt to become or become like. And so maybe the way he phrases it, even if we do not seek virtue, he's trying to show that even if someone is humble and doesn't claim to believe that they can control themselves or overcome themselves by their own, they can at least praise something, and that is the beginning of the opportunity. So actually, he's coding humility into the seeking. So in a sense, seeking in itself requires a bit of pride. If I try to do something, that means I at least think I'm able to do it. But if he says it like this, he's coding the ability to be humble and to seek something at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And he's also, you've got an idea of attention and disposition in that. And so what you turn your attention towards and your disposition towards that will end up guiding your actions in the future. And so it's having your attention and approval of virtue is a first step on that road, right? So even though it's not like being virtuous, it's something where you're changing your course or your direction so that you can start moving in that way. And if you don't approve of virtue, you're not going to be acting virtuously. And so I think it's something where he's showing the importance of attention, focus, and disposition towards these matters of virtue or vice.
And in a way, even being able to imagine the poor man after death and his position in the afterlife is what allows you to orient yourself towards praising him. So if basically it's the realm in which all of the masks are taken down, because it's obvious what side of the line the poor man is on or the rich man is on once you're there.
Yeah, that was he does have theater imagery in here as well. And there was a quote that I really liked. It was just as in the theater, when evening falls and the audience departs and the kings and generals go outside to remove the costumes of their roles, they are revealed to everyone thereafter, appearing to be exactly what they are. So also now, when death arrives and the theater is dissolved, everyone puts off the masks of wealth or poverty and departs to other world. Yeah, so it's this division of showing that. And then the next line is, when all are judged by their deeds alone, some are revealed truly wealthy, others poor, some of high class, and others of no account. And so he shows how we can have these masks on now, but the true character of our heart is going to be revealed and taken off after death. But I really like that theater imagery that he uses.
And there's even more just in, I think it's in the Beatitudes when Jesus, and similar to that, when Jesus talks about storing up treasures in heaven, that's like a deeper sense of treasure that, yeah. And I guess what I'm hoping that he'll go more into in the future is stuff about like, given that I am a rich man, what should I do? Or given that I am a poor man, what should I do? So more particularizing the virtue of being in the different places, making it more specifically on wealth and poverty, rather than a more abstract sense of which one is truly wealthy, which one is truly poor. The context that you're in is going to tell you what options you have and how you should orient yourself to be more virtuous. So hopefully he'll get a little bit closer to actually discussing those issues, which that's what I'm hoping is in the next few. And I think it is actually. That's what I'm expecting. That's where this kind of discussion would naturally lead, right? Yeah. There's one other, I wanted to mention it earlier. There's another thing that's not from this, but a parable that I realized is actually really similar to the Lazarus and the rich man parable. And it's in Brothers Karamazov. I forget which character says it. One of the characters, maybe Alyosha, probably Alyosha, maybe Father Zosima, I don't know. But it was basically about a woman who's very greedy, very selfish, and she has, like, she's comfortable. She's like maybe like upper middle class for a small Russian village in the 19th century, whatever that is. And she has and when she dies, she is thrown into the pit, and because she had nothing to show for herself. She had no faith, she had no works, neither. and so on nobody's standards is she getting in. And she says something like, and an angel comes up to the edge of the pit and is like pitying her or something like that, and says like, oh, do you have nothing to get, no way to get into heaven? And then she says like, can you think of like one, the angel says, can you think of like one good deed that you did in your life? And she's like, let me think. And she goes like, oh, there's that time that I gave that onion to a poor guy. And then the angel says, oh, you mean this onion right here? And he's like, oh, this is the onion that you gave the poor guy at your doorstep. And she's like, yeah, that's the onion. And then he says, oh, this onion will save you. The fact that you gave that onion can save you. So he extends the onion out to her, and so he says like, grab onto the onion and I can pull you out of the pit. And so she grabs onto the onion, and then he's pulling, and then all the other people in hell are like, oh wait, I'm going to grab onto the onion too. And then so she's like, oh no, this is my onion. I'm the one that gave the onion. So all these other people try to grab the onion, and then in the fight, she rips the onion in half and she falls in. So it's like another additional thing to add on to this is, even so in that sense, she did build up a treasure in heaven. The onion was her treasure in heaven, but you can even ruin those or make those worthless if you take them on for the wrong reason, because she likes the onion because of the fact that it's going to get her out of the pit, not because. And when she values it for that reason, she hoards it from other people. So her virtue is for her in a sense, and it wasn't for the whole in the first place. It was for her own pride.
I guess like kind of what you're saying here, and I mean, it's interesting that it's an angel that she had given the onion to. I don't know if that's the poor man himself was the angel, but I mean, Chrysosthom talks about how when Abraham would, let in and bring in the strangers to his house, like so every so often, you may be entertaining an angel. So they say to be hospitable for that reason. And I guess sort of the same thing he then in that second sermon is kind of the thing that he's talking about, is not to be, judging, people based on their virtue as to whether or not you give freely to them. He has a really good emphasis of the gospel here, because he says, if we're going to be trying to, look at inside people's hearts and see whether or not they're worthy of being the recipient of our charity, like how much more unworthy are we of Christ's free charity to us. And so, I mean, it seems as if this woman in this parable, whether or not I have the same view about the role of her works within her salvation as our resident Lutheran here, but it seems like she's taking these on almost for the wrong reasons, in that she's doing it for herself, or trying to judge and weigh the worthiness of others in this act as well.
I think that in a way that the way the Orthodox would interpret with the onion story, that the faith works distinction there is the fact that that onion split when she used it, or the fact that that's what she ended up using the onion for, means that the virtue that she was prompted towards to give that poor man the onion was not born out of her faith. So the fact that that was the condition, that's what happened, that's what ended up happening with her virtue, means that she was devoid of faith in the first place. So it ends up becoming the same issue. Yeah. Which is
Paul says this as well when he talks about whether or not good works are pleasing to God, and so it's those that are done through faith that are truly pleasing to Him. So you can certainly have secular righteousness in any sense, but it's the righteousness of Christ that through faith that's actually pleasing to God.
Which is sick. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments, Geld?
Yeah. I just wanted to close with a comment that I thought was pretty sick about the giving and being charitable without trying to judge or evaluate who you're giving to. The line is, we do not provide for the manners, but for the man. So we're not supposed to give based on the disposition or the goodness or evil of the person that is in need, but we're called to show altruism and to be charitable to all people. But I thought it was just a really good tight line to describe that. But that would be the last thing I had to say.
Any other last comments, Logan?
I think for tonight, I think we're all set for now, unless you had anything else you want to draw our attention to, Marcus. But
No, I'm just excited to see where it goes. It's
Yeah.
very very good writer. I don't think we really even did it justice that how cleanly and clearly he communicates his points. So I definitely recommend everybody else checks it out. Maybe if for the other two, read along. We'll have a reading club. Join us in the comments section below. That's one of the things I've so far I've been disappointed a little bit with the channel. I don't see enough activity in the comments section. A lively debates, but that's for the future. So, okay. Thanks for coming on, guys. We'll see you later. Bye.